everyone, and welcome to Teaching and Assessment Literature class with me. And for today, we'll be discussing approaches to teaching literature. So, the lesson before this talks about the models in teaching literature, and for today's discussion, we are also going to touch about models and approaches hand in hand. But before we go to discussing the or the specific approaches in teaching literature, let us have first a refresher. What do we mean when we speak of approach? So, according to the dictionary, approach has something to do with a way of dealing on something. Right? It's a way on dealing on something. And of course, when we talk about approaches in teaching literature, it will definitely give us an idea that we'll be talking about the way of teaching literature itself. Now, before we go to teaching approaches, let us have first an idea that the teaching of literature is geared toward enhancement of students' language proficiency, along with the information, static value of English language in general, and over the past years. Alright, so whenever we are teaching literature, we have to remember as teachers, my dear future teachers, that our ultimate goal must be enhancing. Okay, it's the enhancement of students' language proficiency together with informational static value of the English language. So you have to make sure that you are not going to have statically, physically static students, but you have to also give them the static value of English language, which of course they could only learn when they are reading literature. Okay, as we know that creative literature, to be exact, offers the static view and value of the language. So, over the past years, us teachers have faced a lot of challenges as to how to teach. Okay? How to teach these literary works effectively. And what particular literature or literary elements were incorporated in our language classrooms? Or simply, how may language activities be designed to maximize students' learning of the language, its components, and the literary piece that we could use as springboard? How does teacher use an approach to influence students to have authentic language learning? So you get the point? We have to get to know these approaches because we have to give our students authentic language learning. And as Moody in the year 1983 said and stressed that teaching teaching approaches rather provides a model, the operation to be used in presenting the content that leads to development of reading skills. Okay, leads to development of reading skills. In this case, it is the teaching of literature that ensures stimulation of students' interest in their development of language proficiency. Okay, though you may say, "Ma'am, we could just learn language by observing people." Well, that happens for first language acquisition, but considering, dear people, that you are teaching or you are to teach English as a second language, I mean, nobody has been born in the Philippines who already spoke English. There has been an input before he learned or she learns that. Alright, so you have to make sure that you make use, okay? You make use of literature to stimulate and develop the interest of your students to learn the language. Okay, to learn the language. Now, before we get into discussing these approaches, I would like to show you three pictures, which I suppose before you get into this video, you have already encountered them. Okay? So there are three pictures. So we have here a silhouette of a man with a necktie and a direct instruction uh, signage and I suppose an old teacher and a student. So on the activity previous this video lesson, there has been a forum in our learning management system which you have to answer. So what commonalities rather, not what is, okay? What commonalities do you observe in these pictures? In the three pictures. So probably you might say, "Mom, I think they are kind of confused or they are having a hard time or they are wondering or I mean with a question mind question marks in that photo number two and a man who seems like he's scratching his head and obviously the kid on the third picture, I think they are confused. Do you think so? And if they are talking about confusion or showing kind of being misled or questioning themselves what to do, where to go, or how to solve something, how to understand this message does each picture convey? So, picture number one could mean, I mean, if we are in on site today, we are already having some sort of meaningful discussion, like, where am I? Right? Diba? This pictures definitely talks about confusion, know-how, or whatsoever. Alright? It has something to do with having hard time understanding letters, numbers, or whatever it is that has been written. Alright? And how does the message relate to the choice and adoption of teaching approach? If they are talking about confusion or showing something like being misled or misunderstanding or not understanding something, and then what does the message relate to the choice and adoption of teaching approach? Now, dear people, dear teachers, at this point of time, I wanted to make it very clear as crystal that choosing and adopting teaching approach depends on you. But in for you to be able to do so, you have to get to know your students. You have to get to know the people whom you are going to apply the approach to. Alright? Now, before we get into discussing the approaches, we have a lot of stopovers. Alright? Let us have first the different models in teaching literature. Alright, so just like what I have told you in the beginning of this video, we are also going to touch the models in teaching literature. Like in the previous lecture that I have uploaded in our LMS, I have discussed there, though not personally discussed there, cultural model, language model, and personal growth model. Now, models and approaches are working hand in hand whenever you are teaching, regardless whether you are teaching language. I mean, at this point of time, I suppose your language teacher or you're teaching an assessment of grammar, I suppose, have already told you or have already taught you about teaching language teaching models, right? So there are a lot of teaching models, and when it comes to teaching literature, we have three. Now, as we all know, you people, as we all know, the study of literature involves the understanding of culture, language, and personal engagement to connect with the world. So we have mentioned that, all right, in our discussion, and even before this, during our face-to-face classes. I am already mentioning to you multiple times already that when you are teaching literature, you are not only teaching literature, but you are also teaching your students culture, language, and personal growth, right? From the models itself, from the models themselves, cultural, language, personal growth. All right. Now, this literary models, cultural model, language model, personal growth model, they are they could be better understood with teaching approaches. Now, what are this? Right? What are these teaching approaches? So we have a lot, alright? There are a lot of teaching approaches, but we are going to just point out six. Right, six of them. And this following information is taken from Ling and Ng's types of English literature teaching approaches preferred by teachers in secondary schools in Miri. Alright? And that's available in IJ ijleal.ump.edu.my. So it's Myanmar or Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so let's get to know these approaches one by one. But let me just introduce you to them, alright? As if they were your friends, because they are going to be your friends in the future as language and literature teachers. Alright, so we have six different approaches in teaching literature or to teaching literature rather. We have stylistic approach, moral philosophical approach, paraphrastic approach, language-based approach, personal response approach, and information-based approach. Now, these six approaches could be grouped depending on which model they fit into. Alright, but before we get into that, let us first get to know these approaches one by one. So we'll start with the information based approach. So, from the term itself, information based approach gives knowledge and information to students. It is teacher centered and demands a lot of teachers' input in giving students various contents of literary texts like on historical, political, and cultural and social background. Okay? Hence, knowledge is delivered as a source of information to students. And it also includes reading from criticism or notes or explanations and lectures given by teacher for examination sake. Now, from the term itself, information based. So, of course, this is obviously a based, teacher centered. Okay? This is a teacher centered approach. Alright, this is a teacher centered approach because as teachers, of course, our job is to inform our students, right? To give them information about the text. Now, why? Remember that, of course, not of our students, not all of our students will come to class empty handed or tabula rasa or blank slate. Some of them some of them already have knowledge about a certain kind of piece or literary work. But we have to accept the fact, my dear teachers, that because of because of the advancement of technology, there are only rare, okay, or few students who really read literary works, okay, or they only read literary works on Wattpad. I mean, we are also guilty of that. Alright, so in this kind of approach, the teacher serves to be the sole source of information. Okay? The teacher's job is to feed students, give them background information, okay? Background knowledge about this literary text. Historical background, political background, even cultural, okay? Cultural background. So not only the personal okay this approach is not focused on what your what your readers or your learners, your students would learn to it personally or from it personally, but the mere focus is to give information. All right, just like what the previous slide said, knowledge of literature in this kind of approach is delivered as a source of information to students. Okay? As a source of information, political information, social information, cultural information, every information. All right. So, biggest question, which teaching model does this approach fit? Well, as I have mentioned earlier, as teachers, we have to provide them political background, get that historical background, and cultural background of literature. Hence, obviously, this kind of approach, information-based approach, fits to cultural model. Now, why? Why? How? Right. It fits to cultural model because cultural model is related to information-based approach, as mentioned by Tony Seth in the year 2011. Okay. Literature is a source of facts. Acts as a source of facts or information to be put across to students by teachers. Again, by teachers, not by themselves. Okay, so we use literature as a source of information, factual information that we are to share to our students. So, as literature teachers, we have to embrace that we are also sometimes history teachers. Okay? As there is a super mega thin line of separation between history and literature. So, you have to embrace that, teachers. And also, it stresses the role of literature in condensing values, ideas, and wisdom accumulated within a culture over historical periods. That's why, as language teachers, again, we have to embrace that we are also history teachers. As we teach literature, we are also teaching them historical events. And you have to, again, remember and bear in mind that if we are to give gender to literature, it's what? It's what? A woman, right? It's a woman. So it's a she, as literature is covered by or is a product of significant human experiences. S-H-E, she. Alright? So, information-based approach is under cultural model. Okay? So if you are to work with a cultural model of teaching literature, then your approach would be information-based. Alright? You are to teach this literature using information-based approach. So in this case, you are going to do all the talks, or you are going to inform your students, okay? Educate your students about facts that they could get from this literary works. Alright? Okay? So, cultural model and information-based approach assists students to understand and appreciate the different cultures and ideologies of thoughts and feelings which are beyond their time and space. Yeah, which are beyond their time and space. That's why, though, for example, William Shakespeare already died years and years back, we still have to introduce him to our students. Though Amador T. Daguio, Jose Garcia Villa, as Marquez Benitez, and other Filipino English authors, we have to introduce them to our students. And how could we do that? By using this approach. using information-based approach that will enable you to teach your students to love, to understand and appreciate culture, ideologies that exist before their time. Okay? It is a traditional approach, teacher centered, no? To wrap it up, information based approach is a traditional one, teacher centered, and delivers information and facts to students. To students, right? Teachers deliver facts to students. Alright? Are we good with the information-based approach? So it is under and covered and related to cultural model. Okay? Second approach, we have what we call the paraphrastic approach. Now, paraphrastic approach is primarily, okay, primarily paraphrasing and rewording the text to simpler language or use other language to translate it from the term itself. Paraphrastic. Alright? So we are paraphrasing, rewording the text to simpler language. Okay? It As teachers, we use simple words rather, or less complex sentence structure to make the original text easy to understand. From the term itself, paraphrasing and rewording to make it easier to understand. Alright? You have to always bear in mind that you're dealing with language learners whose native language isn't English. Okay? You're dealing with people whose first language is not English. So, okay, something dropped. So, as teachers, we could use paraphrastic approach wherein we would reword the text. We would use simpler language so that our learners would would understand literature or the text that they are reading or that we are asking them to read. Now, like information based approach, this one is also teacher centered. And what's kind of boring about this approach? Now, just for my take to this, since this is teacher centered and does not contribute much interesting activities towards students, it's boring. Again, our task here when we are using this approach is that we are using, okay, simpler terms to allow our students to understand the text. So of course, it's our job, right? We are going to do the translation, the paraphrasing, and the rewording. Unless we have students who has wide vocabularies and who are wide readers. But those kind of students sadly are rare. Right? So this is a teacher centered approach. Now, since paraphrastic approach and the following two approaches that we are to discuss belong to the same uh, teaching model, we'll first discuss the next two. Alright, so that's for a paraphrastic approach. From the term itself, we are paraphrasing and rewording the text to simpler language or to translate in our language, for instance, in Filipino, so that our students would understand the text. Alright, next to paraphrastic, we call the stylistic approach. This approach implies literary critics and linguistic analysis. And it is for students to appreciate and understand the literary text in a deeper manner. Also, the stylistic approach helps students to interpret the text meaningfully and develops language awareness and knowledge. Hence, In this kind of approach, we analyze the language prior to the element of the literary text. Alright, from the word itself, style, stylistic. Alright, so what we are looking after is the style of the author, particularly his or her choice of words. Alright, his or her choice of words in writing or coming up with the literary text that he has worked with. Alright, so stylistic. Critics, linguistic analysis. Alright, so we are dealing deeper on on the author's, okay, on the author's style of writing. Okay, before we get into who are the characters or the elements of the story itself, we are first analyzing the language used. Okay, the style that the author applied, and or how he or she made use of these words to be able to come up with a certain literary work. Alright? You get the point? Alright. Now, another one is what we call language based approach. Now, this approach helps students pay attention to the way language is used when studying literature. Almost the same with stylistic. Alright? It is, however, student centered and activity based because we are after the productive use of language. Okay, so we are uh, using literature to engage our students, engage our learners to make use of language. Because of that, language based approach engages students more on experiences and responses. Okay? Experiences and responses. How? While, not how. While they are using the language. Hence, activities like role play, close poetry, close uh close test or close to the sea, yeah, it's correct, is a kind of language test. Maybe you have asked yourself, what is close? I only know close. Okay, close is a kind of language test wherein there are missing parts of the sentence or of the phrase or of the paragraph, and the participant or the examinee is asked to replace the missing language item. Okay, so that's close. So activities like that, role playing, poetry recital, discussions, forum and debates, dramatic activities, making predictions, brainstorming, rewriting stories ending, and summarizing. Okay, or practice using this language based approach. So again, when we are talking about language based approach, we are after productive use of language in role play, in poetry recital, in discussions, and of course, we are using literature as springboard. Alright, now we have this paraphrastic, stylistic, and language based approach. So, to which teaching model, do you think these approaches fit? Oh, no brainer? No brainer from the language based approach itself. Obviously, talks about it's under language model. Now, language model comprises paraphrastic approach, stylistic approach, and language based approach as it integrates language and literature as a source to improve students' language proficiency while learning the language. Okay, you are learning the language using literature as your springboard, and also using literature, you are developing language proficiency of your students. It also uses literature in teaching different function of language like grammar, vocabulary, language structures that could be found from the literary text. Okay, so we are using again literature as a springboard, okay, to teach language. And because of this, it helps our students to attain literature aesthetic aspect solely via expression and communication quality of literature. Remember, the activities that are in line with this are role playing, closed test, poetry recital. Okay, so our students have been able to learn the aesthetics, okay, the beauty, the art of literature, while they are also learning how to use language. So we are forming, developing, and producing speakers who are sophisticated speakers. Alright? Get it? Alright. Now we are down to our last two approaches. And the second to the last is what we call the personal response approach. Personal response approach encourages students to make sense of their experience and personal lives with the text themes. It also promotes students to associate the subject matters of the reading text with the personal life experiences. Alright, so personal response. You are not after learning cultural background, political background, or learning the language, but you are okay when you are using this approach. You are after connecting your students to the text. How? By relating their experiences to the experiences of a particular character in the story, or to the theme of the story. All right. So it has from the term itself, personal response approach. So it encourages students to understand the literary work based on relating it or by relating it to their personal experiences. Also, it engages individual in literary text reading as a as personal fulfillment and pleasure can be met while developing the language and literary competency. So there is a personal value, okay? Personal development while you are reading the text because you learned values and you apply it to your personal experiences. All right? So it encourages, in short, it encourages students to love and enjoy reading literature for personal development as well as to relate their relationship to the environment. Okay? And this one, just like language-based approach, could make use of brainstorming, but your focus is not in the language, okay? It's not in the use of the language, but brainstorming of your experiences, whether you and your other classmates share the same experience with a particular literary character, like for example, The Dead Stars by Paz Marquez Benitez. Do you also experience the same experience like Julia, who have been Julia Salas, right? Who thought that she's the only one without realizing that she is the side chick in the story because Alfredo Salazar already have who's the girl again? I forgot the name. Yeah, already have someone. Okay, I forgot the name. I only remember Julia Salas. Alright, so it's like brainstorming whether you and your classmate also share the same experience. Alongside small group discussions for journal writing, how did you relate? Or if you were this character, would you do the same? To interpret opinion or generating the views from a text. Okay, so again, as long as you are connecting your personal experiences, your goal is to allow your students connect their personal experiences to the text. That's personal response approach. Lastly, we have moral philosophical approach. In this approach, the learners seek moral values from a particular literary text while reading it. Okay? And it helps students to be aware of philosophical and moral values and identify them. Students need to go beyond the text for moral and philosophical inference. Okay? In this approach, this is uh, this requires students to go beyond what is written. They have to really seek, okay? Seek, hanapin, not only look, but really seek, okay? To seek moral values, moral rather, moral learnings that they could get uh, from the text. All right? And with approach, teachers are able to direct students to achieve self-realization as well as self-understanding while interpreting the literary work. So, since the ultimate goal is to kind of get moral and philosophical views that will, of course, add to your moral and philosophical beliefs as a human. While you are reading the text, while you are asking your students to read the text, you are also enabling them to be aware and understand themselves. At the same time, be able to interpret the work, the literary work. And this kind of approach, moral philosophical, is very much in line with the aim of Malaysian secondary English language syllabus to instill values for good citizenship. So, of course, as teachers, again, just like what I have told you countless time already, that you must not only teach your subject, English or literature, but we have the advantage, dear language literature teachers, to influence our students to be good citizens of this country and to be able to live a life that is not only honoring themselves, their families, or their city, but also the one who created us. Ba? So that's for moral and philosophical approach. The ultimate question, personal response approach and moral philosophical approach. Where or to which teaching model do these approaches fit? Of course, again, no brainer. We only have three choices. We already have cultural model and language model for the first four approaches that we have discussed. So this too belong to personal growth model. Okay? Why? Simply because personal growth model comprises personal response approach and moral philosophical approach as it enables students to develop their language, characters, and emotions by connecting and responding to the issues and themes to their lives, themes of the literary works. Hence, this kind of approach on their personal growth model encourages students to love and enjoy reading literature for personal development as well as to relate their relationship to the environment. Right? So that's all for approaches to teaching literature. Now to give you a quick mnemonic, okay, on how to remember these approaches or to which model do they belong. I have made it color coded. So green ones is for language model. Okay, same color code as the model from the previous discussion. So, under language model, we have stylistic approach, paraphrastic approach, and language-based approach. So, if you're a kind of teacher who is after developing language proficiency of your students, you make use of language-based model and utilize stylistic, paraphrastic, and language-based approach. However, if you are just after information, okay, or informing, educating your students of about culture, history, and other events that made or that has occurred in the past could make use of cultural model. And if you are using cultural model, of course, the approach that you're going to utilize is information-based approach. And if you are after personal growth, you could utilize moral philosophical approach and personal response approach. But one last important note, teachers, before I end this video, that as language teachers, just like what I have told you in the beginning of this video, this model and approaches is not a one size fits all thing. So if you handle four classes or even a single class with 40 students, don't expect that a single approach will work for them all. Okay, so you have to be creative, resourceful, and really work with all these approaches, put them together in the best way you can, so you could cater the needs of your language and literature learners. Again, there is no such thing as one size fits all or free size, free size teaching model or teaching approaches. As teachers, we must know when and how to perfectly utilize all this. And the secret to do that is to get to know your students. That's why there would be some activities wherein you are going to group together this language learners who are good at singing, this language learners who are good at dancing or good at drawing, and give them tasks that fits on the talents that they have. Alright? I mean, just like a tree, you cannot expect a mango tree to bear sampalok or santol, right? Or a banana. You cannot expect a banana tree to have a mango fruit. So it's not a one size fits all thing. So when it comes to approaches to teaching literature, there's no single approach that would fit to every student. So if you have 45 students, maybe you need two, three, four, five, six approaches, okay, put together to be able to cater the needs of your students. Alright, that will be all for today, teachers. And if you have questions, you may directly send me the questions via direct message or personal message or in our group chat. Okay, that will be all for today. Goodbye and thank you, teachers. Keep safe.